Emily Harper drove a bread knife straight into the center of the table and left it standing there trembling while every woman in the church hall went silent. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply looked at the three women who had been whispering behind their hands. Looked at them the way a person looks when they have finally completely run out of patience for cruelty, dressed up as concern, and she said very quietly, "Say it to my face, or don't say it at all." Nobody said a word. Emily picked up her basket, walked out the door, and didn't look back. That was the morning everything in Coldwater Creek, Montana began to change. If you're new to this channel, welcome, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. Jacob Walker heard about it before noon. That was the thing about Coldwater Creek population, 412. Not counting the dogs and the widow Pearson's 17 cats, word moved faster than weather. By the time Jacob had finished mucking out the east stable and walked back to the main house to wash the smell off his hands, 3 separate people had already stopped by the fence to tell him what Emily Harper had done at the ladies' auxiliary morning gathering. The first was Pete Dunmore, who ran the feed store and had a gift for making everything sound more dramatic than it was. "She stabbed the table," Pete said, breathless, leaning over the fence rail with both arms. "Right in front of Dora Calloway and the Henderson sisters. Nearly took somebody's finger off." "She stabbed the table," Jacob repeated flatly, "with a bread knife. Left it standing straight up, like a grave marker." Jacob looked at him for a long moment. Was anybody hurt? Well, no. But the point is, "Then I reckon it's between Emily and whoever she was talking to," Jacob said, and went inside. The second person was his ranch hand, a wiry 20-year-old named Clem, who had the unfortunate habit of repeating everything he heard at double the volume it was originally spoken. "Miss Emily told off the Henderson sisters," Clem shouted from across the yard. "Right there in the church hall, said, and I'm telling you word for word, boss said say it to my face or don't say it at all. Can you believe it, Miss Emily?" "I can believe it," Jacob said, not looking up from the fence post he was resetting. "But it's Miss Emily. She never—" "Clem." Jacob finally looked up. What exactly were the Henderson sisters saying? Clem's mouth opened, then closed. He shifted his weight from one boot to the other. "Well, you know, the usual." Jacob knew. He'd been hearing the usual for the better part of 5 years. He drove the post deeper into the ground and said nothing. The third person was his nearest neighbor, old Reverend Dawes, who came shuffling down the road in the afternoon heat with his hat in his hand and a look on his face that fell somewhere between admiring and troubled. "I'm not here to gossip," the Reverend said, settling himself on the porch step without being invited, which was his way. "I'm here because I think Emily Harper is going to leave Coldwater Creek." That made Jacob stop. He'd been standing at the water pump sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he went still the way a man goes still when something unexpected hits the center of his chest. "What makes you say that?" he asked carefully. Reverend Dawes turned his hat in his hands. "Because I've known that girl since she was 7 years old, and this morning was the first time I've ever seen her stop pretending it doesn't hurt." He looked up at Jacob. When a person stops pretending, son, they're either getting ready to fight or getting ready to leave. And Emily Harper has been too gentle for fighting her whole life. Jacob looked out of the road that crossed in front of his property. Across that road, set back behind a row of cottonwood trees, was the Harper place, a modest 2-story house that Emily shared with her widowed mother. The curtains in the front window were closed, which was unusual for this hour. "She'll be all right," Jacob said. He wasn't sure if he believed it. Reverend Dawes stood up and put his hat back on. "I'm not asking you to fix anything, Jacob. I'm just telling you what I saw." He paused at the end of the porch. "She's been a good neighbor to you for a long time. Better than most people notice." He walked away down the road, and Jacob stood there at the pump, with water dripping from his forearms and something uneasy settling in his stomach. He told himself it was none of his business. He told himself that for the rest of the afternoon, and he almost managed to believe it. Emily Harper had moved into the house across the road from the Walker Ranch 7 years ago, when her mother's health began declining and Emily came home from teaching school in Billings to care for her. Jacob had been 25, then newly responsible for the ranch after his father's death, too busy and too tired and too proud to ask anyone for help. Emily had shown up at his door 2 weeks after he buried his father with a pot of venison stew and a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, and she'd said simply, "You look like you haven't eaten a proper meal in a week." He hadn't. He'd thanked her and eaten the entire pot that night alone at his kitchen table, and felt for the first time since the funeral something approaching human. That was 7 years ago. In those 7 years, Emily Harper had become what exactly Jacob had never been entirely sure how to categorize her, which was part of the problem. She wasn't a sweetheart. She wasn't a hired hand. She wasn't quite a friend in the ordinary sense of the word, because friendship in Jacob's experience was a thing you maintained at a comfortable distance. Emily didn't maintain any distance at all. She simply showed up. She showed up with food when someone was sick. She showed up with her mother's old quilt when the Morrison family lost their house to a kitchen fire. She showed up on Jacob's doorstep every September with a jar of preserved peaches, because you never think to make them yourself, and you'll want them in February, trust me. And she was always right. She was generous to a degree that sometimes made Jacob uncomfortable, because generosity on that scale seemed to ask something of the people who received it. It seemed to ask them to be worthy of it. He wasn't always sure he was. What he was sure of, what everyone in Coldwater Creek was sure of, though they rarely said it plainly, was that